I went to Japan never having been to East Asia, the Far East, and this was fascinating for me in any event, but also I found that it was quite easy to talk to people in the Yakuza, Japan's organized crime groups, who are the largest single organized crime structure in the world anywhere, partly because they're semi-legal. It's a very peculiar situation that I try and outline there. And what I discovered is that the Yakuza feel as threatened by globalization as a lot of big companies do, with competition from places like China and India, and also internal Japanese problems like the aging society. I spoke to the deputy head of the largest Yakuza organization in Tokyo, for example, and he said to me how stressful life had become, because they were finding it so difficult to recruit people into the Yakuza because they were all being offered better jobs in IT and with the banks and things like this, and they didn't understand the value of the family values that the Yakuza offered and things like that. And so they don't have as many youngsters to carry out the nasty work of violence that they used to. And so what they tend to do now is they're beginning to outsource this violence. And who do they outsource it to? They outsource it to the Chinese. Because the Chinese, along with their huge economic growth and social transformation going on in China, they are, of course, seeing a tremendous expansion in organized crime. And so you get a lot of Chinese guys who go over to Japan, work for the Japanese Yakuza as muscle for 3 or 4 months or so, and then go back home and disappear again. So you're seeing the processes of globalization that happen in the corporate world happening in the criminal world as well. As for China itself, that is the great challenge of the future. And the challenge is lies less in things like the triads and the sort of traditional sense of organized crime in Hong Kong and elsewhere, are more in the sense of the fact that in order to create the jobs that they have to create every year, China will bust any rule in order to produce economically. And we've seen things like Mattel, the toy company, having to send back toys because there's too much lead in the toy and things like that. Volkswagen in Germany got a whole consignment of brakes which were made in China, and they were discovered to have been outsourced to a non-licensed makers, and they were faulty. So this is a very serious issue, that basically there is no agreement on how China produces a lot of this material, and they copy everything, the intellectual property right laws. So what you're seeing is a state in China which tolerates criminal activity to an extent because it has to export to survive. And it is beginning to clash with America and the European Union over this big time, and yet because its economic muscle becomes ever more important, the Europeans and the Americans are reluctant to push the Chinese too far. So what we see is organized crime becoming part of a big political issue about what way the world is going to go. And if we don't start getting some standards on the American side as much as on the Chinese standards and agreeing how we develop economically around the world, then organized crime will be an ever greater part of our global economy. And organized crime, although it is a very effective economic mechanism, leads to political destabilization. This is primarily a very big political and economic problem.